And welcome back to another episode of the Big Gay Overalls podcast. Who can believe we're up to episode 15, I think this one is. And today I'm very excited. I'm actually handing over the reins today, which is a little scary, but I'm joined by my beautiful wife, Sharon. Hey, honey.
Trust me. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? But we had a conversation about some things in the car the other day, as we often like to do, and it kind of sparked, it might be a good conversation to have on the podcast. And you were kind of asking questions. So we thought we'll just throw it over to you and you can ask me the questions and we can have the conversation for everybody's benefit.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things that don't get talked about very often, and I think it's worthwhile to bring them up here.
Okay, perfect. So the floor is yours, my love. Fire away.
I'm not sure how we actually started this conversation, but we started talking about menstruation and what it was like when you first got your periods and stuff like that. So would you like to tell everyone about your early experiences with menstruation?
Yeah. So I think we were talking about it in the way things were like so much different when we were younger and like you got no information about anything. And I think we started talking about saying, well, you know, I got given a book, Where Did I Come From, to read, which was about, the birds and the bees and changes in your body. And that was essentially it. And it was just left on my bed one day. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to read it. And then afterwards it's like, did you read that book? Yes. Okay. And that was it. That's the extent. And, I remember when I got my period for the first time, so I kind of knew what was happening because I, read the book. But then, I had tried to, the night before I'd kind of noticed a little bit of blood. I was like, oh, I wonder if this is what's happening. And I'd read, and anyone who comes from Gen X will probably have read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, from Judith Blume, the amazing book, which talks about her like thinking she's dying, getting her period, and she's all of her stuff as she evolves as a teenager kind of thing. So I'd read that book and kind of knew, about it. And I'd kept wondering, well, when will I get mine and whatnot? And I'd found in the cupboard like this super, super thin, teeny tiny panty liner, but I went, oh, that's the thing you use. That's what you do. No one ever told me anything. And so I did that, and clearly I got up the next day and that was not adequate for the needs of your first go round. And when I got up, like Mum was like, you need to go have a shower. And it was like this big, thing. And she drove me down. I'd used a little bit of toilet paper or whatever. I can't even remember what we did at the time, but she drove me down to the chemist. And I remember sitting in the car and she's like, go in and ask for this. And I was like, I'm not going in there and asking for this. And I remember crying and being quite traumatized by how embarrassing it was and this thing. And Mum's like, give me $5, get out of the car and go in there. And, there was a male chemist working there who happened to be the father of one of my friends at school at the time. And it's like this, oh, God. So, went in. I didn't really know what I was looking for. And I got this giant pack of Libra pads and they put it in a paper bag and wrapped it up and I got out. And no one still showed me how to use anything or whatever. Like I just figured it out. And I remember like later that day we went down to my grandparents for lunch and clearly it had been discussed with everybody at the table because people were like looking at me and stuff. And even like at some point I must have like leaked a little bit, was showing at the back of my shorts, whatever. And, in front of the lunch table, Mum's like, you need to change. Yeah. You need to go to the toilet. You need to change. Oh, right. And like, it's just, back then. And so that was, when I was 12 or 13, pads, etc., didn't come in nice, tiny, flat, minimal slim design that you could put easily in a pocket. Like they were these literally a surfboard. So you can imagine 13-year-old when none of this stuff was discussed. My mother had a hysterectomy like after her third child was born. So like there was never products in the house. There wasn't like tampons around and this, that, and the other because that just wasn't what happened for her. So we didn't have that exposure, but it was this whole big thing of, and we used the term yesterday, shame about it. Like it was this, thing that turned into, and every week or like every month I'd have to ask Mum, can you buy me more things? Which is how we talked about it. And then I was terribly awkward about it all. I was shy. And one month I didn't ask Mum, and, I'd been using toilet paper or something just to get by. She found out, lost her shit. She was furious at me like it was some sort of national disgrace, like I'd stolen the crown jewels. And then every week she went shopping. She was buying these big, bulky packets of pads. And I swear at one point I had 30 packets that I was trying to stuff into cupboards in my bedroom just to store these damn things. And I'm like, it was like one extreme to the other. But it wasn't anything that was discussed ever. It was just a thing that happened to you.
I was just blown away when you told me about, your first experience of having your periods and you had to go down to the chemist yourself, and just that lack of support and knowledge. So you're just like in the wilderness and got no idea what to do, and you just had to be independent.
And I think, we talked a little bit on the car, like in the car ride, like, being, cis female, like having your period is, an integral part of your, it's a rite of passage, and it's just what happens biologically. Like you can't not have it. And then, the stigma and the embarrassment around that. And we were talking about, imagine if, I was a kid at that point that was questioning, did I even belong in the skin I'm in or the body? Like, well, God, if a perfectly normal, natural, biological event is causing this much shame and stuff, well, I'm definitely not going to talk about the other things. Or even though I didn't believe at that age I was consciously attracted to, girls, but you wouldn't even go down that path either. If this thing that happens to everybody and is perfectly normal, then there was no open forum to discuss even what should this feel normal. Like my friends at school and we never even talked about it really.
Yeah.
Like, you'd see all the girls at school, we all had like matching bloody toilet bags that were like, yay big, that you'd have your stuff in, and we'd all trundle to the toilet at morning tea and lunchtime, and you do things. But no one would talk about it.
Yeah.
Because that just wasn't a dumb thing.
I think some of that's probably changed for teenage girls a bit now, but I think, that inherent shame with your body, like a function that your body's doing on a monthly basis, and it's not talked about it, and it's a shameful thing, And then how are you going to have a healthy relationship with yourself if that fundamental thing you've got to hide and keep secret?
And it's everything at that point. Like I remember when I started to develop breasts, and it's like, you need to start wearing a bra. So, trundle down, get the little training bras with the clip at the front. But there was no like moment of, like you're turning into a woman thing. It was just a thing. And it's that big, and, we went down the path then talking about like for even both of us, like the sex education that you had in discussions around that sex at that time. I was at a co-ed, but Catholic school. And, sex education was, I think it was called the Family Life Program. And this lady would come down from Toowoomba. I still remember it. And me and my classmates with our parents dressed in our finest on a Tuesday night and Thursday night for a couple of weeks, trundled into the school library very awkwardly. Like we all knew what we were there for, like what it was basic, and was like, did not want to be in that room. And then this woman, doing her job, this is not necessarily a fault of her. This is the curriculum she's teaching. And from the Catholic standpoint is, sex is only don't even think about it. It's only for the purposes of procreation. Don't masturbate. You will go to hell. And you shouldn't touch your body inappropriately. You shouldn't think about your body inappropriately or anyone else's. And it was all very, this is what happens. And if this happens, you're bad. And, just layered with God's always watching a thing. And so and there was no scope in that in the relationship I had with my mother, there was no questions. And even if I did have questions, then she may have said, do you have questions? But I was like, well, you're not going to be able to answer it anyway, or it's not going to be a great conversation for me.
Yeah.
So I was always, no, it's fine, and there was just all the layers of shame and everything on top of that, which, again, for something that is biologically, normal, like she's there in that context talking about, periods, and us girls are like, oh my God, all the boys are in the room. And the boys are like, I don't want to hear about it, which flows on to, the relationships that even heterosexual couples have in issues like the dudes 9 times out of 10 are not comfortable going into a store to buy a packet of tampons.
Yeah.
They more so maybe, the younger generations are, but back then it was like, no, you deal with that. Like we were talking about, we'd go shopping and you'd buy your sanitary products, but if all you had to get was that, then you'd get a few other things and put them on the trolley and put them through fast. Or you never walked around the shop carrying a packet of Stay Free, for goodness sake, because God forbid should anyone else know that you have this thing.
Yeah.
Like,
how crazy that is. Like half the population has this.
Yeah.
And it's a biological thing. It's part of, creating more people. And yet we can't talk about it, and it's shameful to have some of your base needs met.
And we don't even, because we're children at the time, essentially, you don't understand that, that you just you take the lead from the adults who are around you. And if this is something that doesn't get talked about. I know that even when, like, we got together, like, we wouldn't really speak about it per se. It's the relationship we've got now. We do, we make a joke about things and whatever, but it's like, it made it sort of normalized it, made it okay. But we generally, you could carry through life that narrative, and then it just doesn't get spoken about.
And how are you supposed to know if something's normal? Like if no one's
100%.
talking about it.
Yeah. Like no one knew, like, is, 2 days normal, is 7 days normal, or it didn't happen, or whatever. And now, like, even when we talk to our niece, like, she'll talk about it and talk about having cramps and, having causing breakouts and stuff like that. That was never on the table. Like, I know my friends in school and we did not talk about it. Like, and if you saw one of the girls, because we had a grey check uniform with a blood spot on the back of her dress, no one was going up and saying, hey, like, it was just everyone was like, oh, this is awkward. Like, no one wanted to help someone else deal with it. And so everyone was on their own. We're all doing the same thing, but we're all on our own. And you just go, oh, Sharon's not swimming today. Oh, some people use that as an excuse to not do swimming. But, but then, because you knew that the male teachers didn't want to deal with it. If you said to the PE teacher, I can't, I've got, women's business. Okay, cool. Go away. I don't want to hear from you. And that's how it was.
So what are the terms that for menstruation that people use?
Well, we talk about flow.
Yeah, Auntie Flo.
Auntie Flo, Flo's in town. Period, like
rags.
You're on your rags. Yeah, you don't hear that as much now, but you're on your cycle or whatever. Like I don't know a heap of slang terms for it.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's amazing how many words there are so that we don't actually use the accurate words.
Yeah.
And my experience was I didn't have the book, so I didn't know what was happening. And, I just had this blood and I'm freaking out like I'm dying. And my mum sent my older sister in to talk to me. She is 5 years older than me. So she sort of explained that stuff, but it was very scary. And like yourself, we didn't have a great deal of money. And we actually, the first time, I think I had to use actual rags that were, torn up and that sort of thing.
That makes me, so if your sister was sent in to tell you, what happened when she started? Like, we'll never know, but like your mother would have, or someone would have had to have the conversation with her at some point. And I know your father would have been, want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, no way.
Someone would have had to talk to your sister to have her, then explain that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it would be interesting, like, talking about even the generation before, like, your aunts and stuff, like some of the older siblings help raise the younger siblings in quite a large family. Like what happened around that? And that's not anything clearly we've discussed at a family gather. So how did you girls find out? Like,
Yeah.
which is, you can see where like belief systems and getting trapped in like shame stories can start with, even doesn't have to be around your orientation or your identity. Like there are people who are 100% heterosexual who carry shame and stuff around this sort of thing, because that's, as women, that's the story they're initially fed, and they've just kind of held on to that because you don't
Yeah.
talk about that stuff. That's private.
Yeah, I saw a clip one day that said about if it was a man and he was cut and he was bleeding for 5 days, it will be a national emergency.
Yeah.
And yet we haven't come very far, particularly dealing with period pain and stuff like that, or most things that women struggle with. Look at perimenopause and menopause and that sort of stuff, some of the stuff that we're experiencing now, where we haven't had other people talk about that stuff as well. So, it's really great that we have each other to share that with. But again, it's not really spoken about much.
No, it's starting to get into more mainstream stuff, like the whole concept of, perimenopause. And before that, all I ever heard of was menopause. And in my mind, it was like, well, when you turn 40, your period stopped. That's all I thought that happened. And you had a few hot flushes. Spoiler alert, that is in fact not what happens. And it's probably closer to 50. And I think maybe it was on this podcast, but about how 20-year-old me was on a trip with women who I now realize were in their 50s. Now I know what they're going through. And they were joking about menopause, but they called it the change. Must be they'd see one of their friends had suddenly made their hair color. For some reason, burgundy was an in thing then. And they're like, oh, Sharon's dyed her hair. It must be the change. Everything. And I was laughing. I was like, God, if I ever get to the change, I'm going to cut my wrist, kind of thing. And they would get, foggy brain in the car park or where we were going or what we're doing. But, that's all they'd write it off as. And now we know that there's so many layers to what your hormones are doing. And there's a bit more information about it, but it was just, there's menopause, everything stops. Well, that's not exactly accurate. And again, bit more freely giving content, but because my mum, for example, had a hysterectomy, it was never discussed. Like she probably went through a variation of menopause, but straight after the hysterectomy. But then, so I don't know what she went through to think about, like, well, when did it happen for me? And it certainly wouldn't have been discussed with my grandmother.
Yeah.
So, what was your experience around that, like with your own mum?
Mum also had a hysterectomy, so she had that sort of earlier. She had 5 kids and twins at the end, so her body had enough.
She would die.
Yeah, but it was we were probably 10 or so, I think, by the time she had the hysterectomy. Yeah, but I remember her going through some mental health stuff. She had mental health illness as well as that, but the struggles around that and how that was shunned and not talked about. So,
and it can be written off as so many other things, like when you first entered, like, you're well into like what we now know as perimenopause, like because we have the space that we have together and you could talk about it, but you said to me one day, it said, I feel like literally I wanted to get out and kill the person in the car in front of me, like the way they went through the roundabout. And like you said, I felt homicidal. Now, if you said that just generally, people would be like, whoa, that's an overreaction. And that's, and it would get dismissed as so many other things, like you need to calm down or whatever. But it's a feeling that's complete, because your hormones are doing, gymnastics and everything else. Like it's completely out of your control, and you can feel like you're crazy, and maybe it is a mental health issue, because you're like, well, normal people don't feel like this and I feel like that. But again, outside of a relationship where you could talk to somebody, it's very difficult. And I'm sorry, but a dude is not generally going to understand that because they don't have the concept of, that it's like, oh, Sharon's being emotional again. Or, I'll go through periods where I'll just burst into tears for no reason. And, you'll say, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I think I got the hormones, and we'll know. But it's okay to verbalize that rather than, why are you so emotional all the time? You should be happy. That whole toxic positivity where it's just like, no, I'm just happy and I'm, powering along with my life because this doesn't really happen.
Yeah. And different cultures deal with life transitions in different ways. So I think one of the things that's missing with it in our culture is rites of passage. So, you would normally have a rite of passage about becoming a woman and about transitioning out of that as well.
And
so there's no signposts or support for that.
And it's celebrated like, when boys get to a certain age, this is what's happened. When girls get a certain age, all the older women take them away and then they, explain things. And because it doesn't matter what culture you are, this is happening, when you turn to that 12, 13, 14, like that's.
Yeah.
So, and however they explain it, but there's a thing and you go, okay, this is okay because these are the people who've been through it. And I think in the context of, what we want to bring to light on this podcast is like talking about sharing stories of, inspiration and love and pride. Part of that is also about sharing the stories of, journey and making it okay for people to talk about anything.
Yeah. And all these things are part of your identity. Like we talked about that a few times about, for us, our sexuality is one part of our identity. It's not the only and not the defining part. There's all these other aspects of us. And I think for us both, it's that stuff changes as well.
Yeah.
So,
so how has that changed for you then?
I think identity is a fluid thing. And even if we talk about sexuality and gender identity, we were talking about gender identity the other day about, when we grew up, there was like male and female, or you're crazy. Like that was the choices. So we didn't even have any conception of anything outside of that, and heterosexual or you're bad. So that really limited. And it's that stuff about you can't be what you can't see. So I think the shifts towards openness and fluidity around all those things makes you consider those things, and it gives you more options. And I think that there is a lot less shame around all of those things. So I think we talked about, we sort of grew up in the middle with, the challenging parts of that, and that pendulum has really shifted to where you can be whoever you want and like whoever you want and identify however you want.
And I think people of our generation are not carrying forward those old stories because we, like you said, we were in that messy middle where we got what our parents handed down to us, but then we had enough other information that was accessible to us that we can say that felt icky. I don't want to carry that forward. And that's not, everyone clearly, but the majority that we have. So we were in that fortunate time where, yes, we still got the old stories and had to carry that, but then we've learnt, and it's been accessible for us to be okay to throw those stories away because they're not relevant to us.
And the way I look at it is there's no mistakes. And I think for me personally, the last probably few years, I've been able to have more compassion for my parents and more understanding of where they've come from and why they did the things they did. So generationally, the generation before was much worse than that. And they did, improved a bit and moved a bit and to get us to here. So,
and and then as that information became more accessible even to them, they kind of by the end of their lives were able to reframe. Like your mum was very accepting of you and our relationship, and she may not have fully understood everything, but as far as she knew, as long as you were happy, then guess what? And then that's okay. And you are my problem now. So, you know,
good luck with that.
She's like, she's yours now. But she could have that, whereas probably her parents would have had no understanding, awareness, or tolerance of that, or even been able to access information to expand and be open to expanding their thought processes. And early in your mother's life, probably not either. But, you know, we, you know, talked to some people not long ago, and they were telling their story, and it's like they described their brother as he was very theatrical. And he was into dancing and theatre and stuff, and he was loved, but not one mention came of, you know, who he was as a person or what made him happy. It was just that. And, you know, he did end his life at some point. And you do wonder if not being able to embrace his identity in that generation, because these were 90-year-old people we're talking to, did that make it, you know, unbearable for him then at some point? And I know that that's happened to a lot of people, that they just haven't had the capacity to embrace who they are. And, you know, you're right, as you say, that identity shifts over time. And, you know, we both came to our sexual identity late in life, or embraced it and I go, okay, yep, and owned it. But, and for a short time, it does feel like that does define you, though, because of the process of you're always coming out to a degree, like you're always coming out, and you have a few big conversations, but having that, you know, that we're not walking down the street every week wrapped in rainbow flags going, you know, we're the only lesbians in the village. Like, that's, you know, not how we've embraced it. It's like, well, we're Lisa and Sharon. We happen to be married. But we also, you know, this is what our whole life encompasses.
And look, I think that's, sorry.
No, you go.
I think that can make it hard to fit into gay culture, because we aren't necessarily flag waving, pride attending, like all that sort of stuff. We've had so much of our identity formed prior to that. And I guess it sounds sort of like it's an add-on.
Yeah, and I've talked on here, like my best friend Tony, who was married to her wife Carol before being married was a thing. Like, they were like early adopters, basically. Yeah. And we had a conversation one day, and like, she passed before, you know, I had embraced my identity fully, but she said that they essentially live a straight life. They live in a, you know, regular neighborhood. They do their job. They go play golf. They hang out. They do the things. Like, they're not defined by their lifestyle, but it's just simply by, you know, we just live an everyday life kind of thing, which is kind of what we do, really. Yeah. Which it can make you feel a bit stuck, as in, well, am I really part of the community if I don't have gay friends? And I've talked about this on the podcast, as we've often questioned, like, do we need more gay friends? But we just need friends. Well, we don't need friends. Yeah. We've got friends. But you know, do we need more of this demographic of friends? But we don't go, well, we need more friends who are gardeners, or we need more friends who are golfers. Like, that just naturally evolves when you're involved in particular activities, but we don't narrow our scope of activities to only do things in the community.
And I think, you know, it's that balancing act, because it's very easy to continue doing what you've already done and still partly be in the closet. So not being freely out, I suppose. And I probably tend more towards that stuff sometimes. The way I look at it is, I'm me, and my sexuality and stuff is no one else's business. So I don't feel like I have to correct people, or like, I don't care what you think. It's none of your business.
Yeah.
when you're a bit more, you will correct people a bit more.
Yeah, and I think though, I guess one thing about doing the big gay overalls and having the embracing my big gay overalls community is it's forced me to be more in the community and to have that more as part of my identity, because that's what I talk about all the time. But I've got to be careful on the flip side of that, not going the other way and going, well, this is now, and I tend to attach an identity to something as like, going all in and having that take over, because this is just something I talk about and something I'm passionate about in a space I'm creating. But again, you're right. It's not like, here's Lisa, wearing her gay
He's
overalls.
gay Lisa.
Here's gay Lisa. That's the word I was looking at. Like, big gay farmer, Lisa. Like, that's not who I am. Like, I'm so many facets to what I do. But I've noticed that since this has forced me to be like, I'm in more Facebook groups in the LGBTQI space, from business to late in life lesbian to social groups than I've ever been in before, just because I want to get my message, because there's someone out there who probably needs to hear it. So I'm in that space and seeing that stuff more often. I feel like that's all the algorithm now feeds me. I'm like, yeah, but what about golf? What about this? What about that?
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting thing where I've sort of stepped into that, but I'm still not 100% comfortable being 100% that either, because I'm like, a bit like you, and we've talked about is, well, what I do and who I do it with is nobody's business really.
Yeah.
And whatever assumption you make.
I remember when I started my previous job and moved down to the Sunshine Coast, and I was quite hesitant to identify anything, because I didn't know what the culture was and what would be accepted there. So I'd had this volunteer job probably more than 10 years ago, probably. And I'd shaved my head, and the manager of the service had talked to my manager and said that I couldn't go and see clients because I would scare them. And I was just like, this is discrimination. You can't do that. Like, and the legacy of those things that you carry forward of not being fully accepted and needing to hide parts of yourself. So I think, in some ways our culture hasn't evolved, and, you do need to protect yourself, but you should have a right to be who you are.
Excuse me, 100%. And we still get reluctant, like, when you go into a workplace situation or a new social situation, like, it's hard to know. Like, when we first moved out to this, semi-rural town that we lived in, we're like, we were wondering, like, is it going to be a thing? Is it going to be? And no one has ever looked twice at us. Not 100.
Yeah.
Not any time. I've not picked up a negative vibe from anyone at all. Like, people say, oh, there are the girls, are the girls coming, and like, and it's been great. But because sometimes we can carry that stuff and then we externalize it, and, what you look for, you see. And if you start, like, almost changing who you are because you fear the reaction, then that may never be there. And granted, like, I don't want to dismiss, it's not probably the wisest thing just to go in, be fully open 100%, because you don't know. And, safety is a big thing, is you don't want to go in and, we were us. I mean, the first few times we went to the local pub for lunch, like, we'd still hold hands on the way in, or hold hands at the table like we do, but we weren't, like, over the top, which is not who we are anyway. But, we were respectful of other people's spaces as well.
And I think, like, the incident we had at the nursing home, we don't take other people's ignorance personally. Like, we're secure enough in ourselves that it doesn't matter if you don't understand and you're asked stupid questions.
And it would have been really easy when that lady come in and goes, oh, they let people like you get married, for us to get all defensive and to come to, like, there could have been a stand up like, what the fuck, and da.
Yeah.
But because we look at things through an air of compassion, usually it's like, well, yeah, since 2018 there was a ballot, like everyone got a say. And then very quickly it became apparent she wasn't being willingly ignorant. And it turned out her own daughter was gay, and she said, oh, I just didn't know if she'd ever be able to get married. So she wasn't coming from a place of hatred or cruelty, but because we gave the space for her to, get to have further conversation on it rather than instantly being defensive.
Yeah.
But it would have been very easy had we not been secure in who we are and our identity to be able to go, hey, that's bullshit, and I'm going to go and report you, and and there would have been people who do that.
Yeah.
But it was a very just an innocent thing where she completely had, I don't know, must have been asleep for 2018 and not realised the ballot, or not. Clearly she must have voted, but Lord knows what you voted for. But, she hadn't connected the dots on that until she saw, like you said earlier, you can't be what you don't see. She clearly had, maybe her daughter hadn't brought her partner around and stuff, whereas we were just, we do everything together, and that's the life we live.
And look, it's not something you see in our town.
Yeah.
It's not visible.
Look, I'm pretty sure we aren't the only gays in the village. I'm 100%. And it was really funny that when, not long after we moved in, there was a big storm ripped through, and there was a story on all the news sites about these two older ladies. So that's the bit I found offensive. Their roof got blown off in the storm. It was near where we lived. And, so many of our friends reached out and messaged, was that you? Was that your house? Are you okay? We're like, well, no, but firstly, two women can live together and they don't have to be gay. That's, let's get that out. And secondly, I'm sure there's more two women living together in town than just us. But thanks for the concern.
Yeah.
And in just the way that, and I think we even saw it and I went, someone's going to ask if that's us, Sure enough, the messages came through, like, where people were worried.
Yeah.
But it's like, there are more people, but they're just living their life, doing their thing. There's no one walking down the street waving the pride flag every day. I've got one in our garage and, in the gym there, and that's cool. It was quite funny the other week. We had some religious door knockers come knock at the door. I came out the garage. I'm like, yes, can I have you? Oh, we're just here spreading the word of Jesus. And I was like, no, we're good, thanks. We're lesbians. And he was like, saw the flag, heard my thing. It was like, and I haven't seen two gentlemen hustle their way down the driveway as fast as that before, but it was very funny. But again, it's like, that's where I took the direct approach rather than going, oh, no, thank you, because you can't get out of that conversation.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to anyone. I'm pretty sure they're not in our audience that listens, but if that's you, that's cool. You do you, boo. But, again, there's different ways to approach it. And it's like, that's how we do it, with a bit of humor. It's like, no, thanks, we're lesbians, we're good, we're fine. So I'm sure there's other people in the community, but again, it's just not seen because they're just living their life.
Yeah.
And we've all had to, learn how to live our life without carrying forward, to circle back to where we started, the stories of shame and secrecy and, like, you look at a woman walking down the street, that there's a fair chance that she every month has a period. Shocking, I know. But, no one is, there are people who take sick days, and I know that it's affected you badly at times when you've had such intense cramping that you would take a day where you just literally could not go to work. But you're not saying to your boss necessarily, because if you say, oh, I can't come in today, I've got period pain, someone would go, oh my God, really? That's it? But unless you've lived with chronic, period pain, like, it's awful. And people don't understand it. But again, you just go, I'm not feeling really good today. I've got some headaches, got an upset stomach. Because that's easier than having to sit there and say to somebody on the phone, particularly if you've got a male boss, to go, yeah, I've got period pain. And because there's so many jokes about it and people dismiss it and everything, no one talks about it again. And that's where you find, women who suffer badly with fibromyalgia and endometriosis. They're invisible illnesses because they just have things attached to being a woman which cause great distress and discomfort in their body, but they don't get the support and the visibility of it because of all this stuff and secrecy that's layered on, and it can't be that bad, like, really.
And look, I think it's amazing how far we've come from where we started out. Like, so the shame and embarrassment around periods to where we're fairly open about it, and that means that we can support each other and normalize those things. You don't feel so alone.
I remember in February, like, I had some surgery, and wouldn't you know it, the day of surgery, thank you, baby Jesus, what arrived? It was usually late, but oh no, had to arrive that day. And then, like, I'm hooked up to drips and stuff. And then I was, as much as I love you and we have such an amazing relationship, I was still mortified where I said, you're going to have to help me with my lady business. And you're like, yep, no dramas. What do you need? And because, like, when I got out of surgery, I didn't have my stuff. The hospital gave me this giant adult diaper to put on. I was like, and I still under anesthetic stuff because I had to say to the nurse, like, I was like, yeah, I need to pee. Oh, by the way, I think my period started right before. I was like, I think my period started. And she's like, oh yeah, no worries, I'll get you something. And they'd bought this giant pair of, like, adult diapers in, and then they'd left this pad on the sink, which was like 5 inches thick and this long. And I was like, okay, that's great. But then, because I had so much other stuff going on, as like, you had to help me get those pull-up things off. And I was mortified. I'm like, no, I can do this. And then I was like, can you bring me in some stuff from home when you come tomorrow? And, it was just that, like, even I had that hesitation of saying, I'm going to need you to help me with this. This is, and then, normally, like, you were in the bathroom with me and I was having to do it. Like, normally I'm like, I've got the door shut and, but it was just still that uncomfortable moment. And I couldn't have been any safer in that moment than with you, but it was still that, I'm going to need help now.
And, like, how are you going to have a healthy relationship with your body or yourself if, you're not comfortable with that? And we're just not taught to be.
Yeah. And then, like we said at the start, it makes it really hard then for anyone who's struggling with their overall identity, their orientation. Like, if you can't have a space where it's okay to talk about basic biology and bodily functions, which are perfectly normal and natural and essential for life. Like, if you're a woman and you're not having a period, well, you're not having kids for, whatever reason, like, it's an essential thing to continue life. So if we can't talk about that, how can you talk about the fact that, well, actually, I don't feel like I fit in the normal molds and I don't belong in my body, or I'm attracted to this sort of person or that. There's just so many layers. And then even if you come out as, like, lesbian, people go, oh, you're not a real lesbian, or you're not a real woman. Well, everything biologically here is still that. Thanks.
Yeah. And how are you going to talk to your doctor about any of those physical concerns or your partner?
Yeah. Well, you don't, because then, so we went to the doctor, at some point, and the whole conversation of pap smear came up. And this was, I think, we went to our first joint doctor's appointment together where you were trying a new doctor, and we were talking about on the way home, and you're like, well, when was your last one? I went, never. Because it was always too embarrassing to me to go, oh yeah, I need to have a pap smear and someone's going to dig around in there and whatever. Like, it was unthinkable that I would rock up to a doctor and drop my dax and do that. Like, I just did not know how to have those conversations or deal with that.
And look, when, like, I have a sexual abuse history, so that complicates it even more. So I had extreme anxiety when I had to go and do that, but it was like I have to take care of the physical needs, and it was sort of part of my recovery of being able to do that. But it's so hard.
And it's like, when we sit and we talk about it now, it's like, it seems, it's ridiculous that people feel like that, but I know that I'm not the only person that feels like that.
Yeah.
And I remember that you told me a story about how you had to learn how to love your body and appreciate it and respect it, given your history, and you had to go through that whole process of figuring that stuff out. And again, no roadmap, no one's necessarily talking about it. I think you were lucky in a group that you worked with, because that was like part of the culture, but it's like not discussed that people have, issues and perceptions around their body and may never have even thought about anything before.
Yeah.
And
I think,
and allowed to.
Yeah. I think, the group you're talking about is a group of ladies predominantly that I worked with at a service, and we'd openly talk about sex and like Brazilians and all these sorts of things, and I had never heard this stuff before, and I'm like, oh my God, my eyes are opening, because I had so much shame around that stuff. But to just be around that, it was just like, oh my God, like there's all this stuff and I know nothing about it.
And they just normalized it though through conversation.
Yeah. And it was a really nice opening up to that. And if these other women are talking about it and doing all these different things, and maybe I could try that, and not with them, but just
interesting lunch breaks.
Dial watch this and be
But once you hear people talk about it freely, you're like, I mean, I remember hearing people I worked with, talking about different aspects of sex and stuff, and you're like, news to me, like, and you just nod and smile and go along with it, because you're like, I don't want to be the one who goes, I don't know what they're talking about, and I don't feel okay about it.
Yeah. And look, we talked yesterday about, when we had the sex education classes. So I was in a public school, so we had it as part of PE. So they would talk about the biology of sex and, all this sort of stuff. And the boys would be making jokes and carrying on in the back. And we were just hoping the time would go quicker so that we didn't, because everyone was so embarrassed about it. But this conversation with these ladies was quite respectful and open, and it was such a different relationship to sex. It was, I think it was pivotal in my opening up to that as a possibility.
And I think, again, what you don't see, you can't be, by having that, role model, and you've seen that that's okay to have those conversations. It's easier for you to then, when you feel safe and you've got the right person with you around you, to then have that conversation, rather than this is, not anything that we talk about necessarily.
So next week we're going to do the ins and outs of sex, literally.
Look out. There'll be a slideshow. No, I joke. We torment our niece, who's, when she has a boyfriend, is like, do you need us to come up and give you a slideshow and do the explanation on, life and the birds and the bees? And she's like, please don't. No. And the education she's getting at school, there's Dottie making a special cameo appearance, is very different to what we got.
Yeah. And look, I had those conversations with her about, all those things. And I had a little pack for her to take for her, and she asked for one for her friend, and, so normalize it's okay to talk about that stuff, and with multiple people. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's like important. Like, we talk about it we've talked about it with her, and like we can make jokes about it, but it's not, to break the tension and stuff, and that it's okay to talk about it, and that, none of these things are, because that's when problems happen, when people can't talk about things, is like, well, this is shameful, I can't talk about it. And then when bad things happen, again, they still don't get talked about and addressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this has been a fun chat. We didn't think we'd talk for long, but we've gone for nearly an hour. And we were just going to start talking about our periods. So I'm pretty sure no one will switch off at the start of it. But I think that the key thing that we wanted to get through today and sort of talk through was, you know, being okay to own every aspect of your identity, whether it's psychological, biological, you know, to do with your sexual orientation, your identity, your gender, like owning that and being okay with, you know, it doesn't have to be clouded in old stories and shame. Does that sound like a good summation of
I
what we
love
sort
it.
of
Well wrapped
talked
up.
about? Fantastic. And look, I know that you have been a hotly requested guest back on the podcast, but kind of let you have a little bit of control today. And I know that we will do another episode because you do want to ask me a lot of other questions about my particular journey and stuff and from my perspective. So we will tee that up in, you know, we'll align our calendars and do that from, you know, one office to the next.
Love it.
All right. And to everyone listening, thank you for the support. I love the comments and messages. Please, if you're watching this, give us a subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss an episode, or on your favorite platform. We're on all the platforms, plus TikTok, Threads, Instagram, all the places. You can find me. I share a blog as well of my random writings out of my brain. And we do have the Embracing My Big Gay Overalls community over on School, which is where we're growing an amazing community of people where you can talk freely about anything. And we're here for it. We love the big conversations, and no trolls, no catfish accounts, no you know, stupid rules. Like, it's just about a group of people coming together, and we'd love to see you there. So all the links are in the show notes. So we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, my love.
My pleasure.